Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel, Chapter 3, Part 2. A few strokes of the whip sounded on the back of each one, and the fearful personage, with the same supreme dignity of demeanor, returned to his seat. However, only minor offenses, as breach of silence, incorrect attitude, etc., are punished in the assembly hall. More severe penalties are carried out elsewhere. A much appreciated intermission cuts the long service. Tea is brought in steaming hot, flavored with butter and salt, according to the Tibetan taste. It is carried in large wooden buckets, whose bearer walks along the rows. Each trapa produces his own bowl, kept until then under his vest next to his skin. The bowls are of special patterns which vary according to the sects. No china or silver ornamented bowls are allowed at the assembly. The highest dignitaries must use a plain wooden one. Yet even that rule, meant as a symbolic remembrance of the renunciation and poverty enjoined by the original Buddhist disciple, is avoided by the astute lamas. The bowl of the richest among them is truly in wood, but some of these wooden utensils, made of special timbers out of the excrescences that grow on the trunk of certain trees, are highly prized and may cost as much as the equivalent of 6 pounds in local currency. In wealthy gompas, the tea is generously buttered, and the monks bring with them to the assembly a small pot in which they blow a certain quantity of the butter that rises to the surface of the liquid. This they use at home, or sell to be put again in tea, or to fill the lamps used in their home, not the altar lamps, for which new butter is required. Trapas bring also some stampa, T-S-A-M-P-A, and there's a footnote here saying, flour made with roasted barley, which is the staple food of all Tibetans. Okay, so let me start that sentence over again. Trapas bring also some sampa from their own homes, and this flour, together with the tea provided free, constitutes their breakfast. Upon certain days, stampa and a piece of butter are distributed with the tea, or a soup served instead of tea, or even the meal includes both tea and soup. The inmates of the famous lamaseries enjoy a rather large number of these special breakfasts offered by rich pilgrims, or by wealthy grand lamas belonging to the monastery itself. On such occasions, hills of stampa and huge heaps of pieces of butter sewn in sheep's stomachs fill the gompa's kitchen to overflowing. The spectacle is still greater when it is a question of soup, for then a number of sheep's carcasses, amounting sometimes to several hundred, are cut up for the gargantuan broth. While living in Kumbum and in other monasteries, though as a woman I was not allowed to take part at the monastic banquet, a pot full of special dainty of the day was brought to my house whenever I wished. It was in that way that I became acquainted with a certain Mongolian dish made of mutton, rice, Chinese dates, butter, cheese, curds, sugar candy, and various other ingredients and spices, all boiled together. This was not the only sample of the culinary science with which the Lamist chefs treated me. A distribution of money takes place, sometimes during the meal. Mongolians greatly outdo Tibetans in their liberality to the clergy. I have seen some of them leave more than 10,000 Chinese dollars at the Kumbum monastery during their visit. So, day after day, in the frosty morning or the warm summer dawns, that peculiar lamast matins is performed in countless gompas all over the immense territories of which Tibet itself is but a small part. And then there's a footnote here that says, the whole of Mongolia, parts of Siberia, of Manchuria, and even European Russia. Oh, so that's the immense territory. The whole of Mongolia, parts of Siberia, Manchuria, and even European Russia, of which Tibet is itself but a small part. Each morning, half-awake lads, together with their elders, are bathed in that curious atmosphere which is a blend of mysticism, gastronomic preoccupations, and anticipations of a dole. That beginning of the day in the Gampa gives us an idea of the character of the whole Lamist monastic life. In the latter we find also, always present, the same ill-sorted elements: subtle philosophy, commercialism, lofty spirituality, and eager pursuit of coarse enjoyments. And these are so closely interwoven that one endeavors in vain to completely disentangle them. Youngsters brought up amongst these conflicting streams of influence yield to one another of them according to their natural propensities and the way in which they are directed by their masters. Out of that early, rather incoherent monastic training issue a small elite of literati, a number of idle, dull, sleepy fellows, wanton braggarts, and a few mystics who resort to lonely hermitages and lifelong meditations. The majority of the Tibetan trapas and lamas do not, however, belong exclusively to any of these different classes. They rather harbor in their mind, at least in potentiality, all of these various characteristics, and according to the circumstances, one or another appear on the stage to play its part. Plurality of personalities in the apparently singular individual is, of course, not peculiar to Tibetan lamas, but it exists in them in a remarkably high degree, and on that account their discourses and behavior provide the attentive observer with continual matter for wonder. Tibetan Buddhism differs widely from Buddhism as seen in Ceylon, Burma, or even China or Japan. So also Lamaist. Why is that such a difficult word? So also Lamaist monastic dwellings have their own quite peculiar aspect. As I have already mentioned, in Tibetan language, a monastery is called a gampa, that is to say, a house in the solitude, and this name is entirely justified. Proudly isolated on summits beaten by the wind amidst wild landscapes, Tibetan gampas look vaguely aggressive, as if hiding defiance to invisible foes, as if bidding defiance to invisible foes at the four corners of the horizon, or when squatting between high mountain ranges, they often assume a disquieting air of laboratories where occult forces are manipulated. That twofold appearance corresponds to a certain reality. Though nowadays the thoughts of the monks may be mostly occupied by mercantile and other vulgar cares, Tibetan gampas were not originally intended for such earthly-minded folk. The hard conquest of a world other than that perceived through the senses, transcendental knowledge, mystic realizations, mastery over occult forces, such were the aims for the pursuit of which were built the lamastic towering citadels and those enigmatic cities concealed in the maze of snowy hills. Yet nowadays mystics and magicians must be looked for mostly out of the monastery. In order to escape an atmosphere that has become too much permeated by material cares and pursuits, they emigrate to more remote, inaccessible places, and the discovery of the hermitages entails sometimes all the hardship of a real exploration. Nevertheless, with a very few exceptions, anchorites begin life as novices in the regular religious order. The boys whom their parents destine for a clerical life are taken to the monastery at the age of 8 or 9. They are given as wards to a monk of their own family parentage, or, failing a relative in the monastery, to some intimate friend. As a rule, the tutor of the novice is the first teacher, and in many cases, the only one. However, wealthy parents who can afford generous recognition to the tuition of an erudite monk either entrust the guardianship of their sons to such a one, or make an arrangement to the effect that the lads be sent to be taught at appointed hours. Sometimes also they beg for their sons the favor of being admitted as boarders in the house of an ecclesiastic dignitary. In that case, the latter will more or less supervise the youth's education. These novices are supported by their parents, who send to their tutor's house the usual supply of butter, tea, stampa, and meat. Beside substantial provisions, rich Tibetans send to their sons various dainties, cheese, dried fruits, sugar, molasses, cakes, etc. Such treasures play a great part in the everyday life of the boys lucky enough to possess them. They allow of countless bartering, and many services can be bought from poor and gourmand fellow students with a handful of shrunk stone-like apricots or a few bits of desiccated mutton. Young Tibetans begin, in that way, the apprenticeship in the tricks of the trade while they are spelling out the first pages of religious treatises. One may guess that their progress in the former science is often more rapid than in the latter. Entirely destitute boys become Geyog, G-E-Y-O-G, which means servant of virtue or virtuous servant. So entirely destitute boys become Geyog. That is to say that in exchange for menial work, they get teaching and sometimes also food and clothing at the house of the monk. Needless to add that in this case, lessons are, as a rule, rare and brief. The professor, who's often illiterate, or nearly so, can only teach the lads to memorize parts of the liturgy recitations, which they mangle dreadfully, and whose meaning they will never understand. Numbers of Geyog remain without being taught anything at all. It is not that their work as servants is heavy, but the carelessness natural to their age prevents them from asking for lessons which are not imposed upon them, and they spend their many leisure hours playing with other little fellows of their own condition. As soon as they are admitted to the monastery, the novices have a share in the income of the Gompa, and as the gifts made by the devotees, to the community. And then she has another footnote here, and she says, as I have given in another book, My Journey to Lhasa, a large number of details regarding the organization of the lamaseries, their source of revenues, information about their tenants, etc., I omit them here. As soon as they are admitted to a monastery, the novices have a share of the income of the Gompa. Oh, okay, I read that sentence already. And in the gifts made by the devotees to the community. If, when they grow older, the novice feels inclined to study, and if circumstances allow, he may seek admission to one of the monastic colleges. There are 4 of them in all, large lamaseries. As for the youths who belong to the smaller Gompas, where no such colleges exist, they may at any time get leave to go and study elsewhere. The subjects taught are philosophy and metaphysics in the Sen College, TSEN, NID. Ritual and magic in the Gyud College, GYUD. Medicine according to Chinese and Indian methods, excuse me, in the Men College, MEN, and the Sacred Scriptures in the Do College, DO. Grammar, arithmetic, and several other sciences are taught outside of these schools by private professors. Both junior and senior students of philosophy hold discussions at regular dates. Often the latter take place in the open, and in large lamaseries, a shady garden surrounded by walls is reserved for that purpose. Ritualistic gestures accompany the controversies and are a lively part of it. There are peculiar ways of turning one's rosary around one's arm, clapping one's hands, and stamping them when putting a question. There are other prescribed ways of jumping when giving an answer or replying to one interrogation by another. And so, though the words exchanged are usually but quotations and only do honor to the memory of the controversialists, their antics and challenging attitudes create the illusion of passionate debates. Yet, all members of the philosophical college are not mere parrots. Amongst them one finds eminent literati and subtle thinkers. They too can quote for hours from countless books, but they are also able to descant on the import of old texts and bring forward the results of their own reflections. A noteworthy feature of these public contests is that at the end of them, he who has been acknowledged the victor is carried round the assembly, riding on the shoulders of his defeated opponent. The College of Ritualistic Magic is generally the most sumptuously housed of the Gompa scholastic institutions, and its fellows, called Gyudpa, Gyudpas, are held in high esteem. They are believed to know the special technique which enables one to propitiate the fierce deities and subjugate evil spirits, and the protection of their monasteries is entrusted to them. The Gyudpa belong to 2 great Gyud colleges that exist at Lhasa, act in the same capacity on behalf of the state. Their appointed duty is to attract prosperity to Tibet and its ruler, as well as to shelter them from all bad influences and malignant undertakings. Gyudpas are also entrusted with the task of honoring and serving the aboriginal gods or demons, whose goodwill or neutrality had been previously won by promising them perpetual worship and attendance to their needs. They must also, by their magic art, keep the untamed evil spirits bound in captivity. Though, for lack of another word in the English language, we are compelled to refer to the Gompas as monasteries, they do not in the least resemble a Christian monastery, excepting the fact that the inmates of the Gampa are celibates, and that the monastery owns property. I hardly see a point in common between the Christian and the Lamaist religious orders. As to celibacy, it must be remembered that all the monks of the Gelugpa sect, and let me spell that for you, GE-LUGS-PA, all the monks of the Gelugpa sect, familiarly called Yellow Cap sect, are celibate. But in various Red Cap sects, celibacy is only enjoined on the fully ordinated monks called Gelongs, Gelongs. Married lamas or trapas keep outside of the Gampa, a home where the family lives. They have also a dwelling place in their respective monasteries, where they stay occasionally at the time of religious festivals or when retiring for a period of religious exercises or meditation. Wives are never allowed to cohabit with their husbands in the enclosure of a monastery. Lamaseries are met just as the Viharas of Ceylon, Viharas, or the monasteries of any Buddhist country, to house people who pursue spiritual aim. That aim is neither strictly defined nor imposed, and common to all Gampa's dwellers. Humble or lofty as it may be, the goal of each monk remains his secret, and he may endeavor to reach it by any means he chooses. No devotional exercises in common, nor uniform religious practices are enjoined on the inmates of the lamaseries. The only rules that exist are of a lay character, relating to the good order, the keeping up of the monastery, or the attendance of the members of the Gampa to daily or occasional meetings. These assemblies themselves have nothing to do with the celebration of a cult in which each one present joins for his own sake, and from which he expects good fruits for himself. When Lamaist monks meet in the assembly hall, it is, beside hearing communications from the monastic authorities, to read parts of the scriptures for the benefit of the monastery, the state, or the supporters and occasional benefactors of the Gampa. Such readings are credited with happy results in bringing prosperity, averting illness and calamities, and keeping away malevolent beings. As for the ritualistic ceremonies, all of a magic nature, they are also performed for some aim in which the celebrants have no share. It is even believed that none can perform them for his own sake. The most proficient Yudpa are compelled to call a colleague when they wish to have these rites celebrated on their behalf. Magic, for personal purposes, meditation, and exercises connected with spiritual life, are accomplished privately by each monk in his own dwelling. None but the teacher whom he has chosen has the least right to interfere in that matter. No one either has any right to ask any account of the Lama's views. He may believe whatever doctrine he deems true. He may even be an utter unbeliever. This concerns himself only. There is no church or chapel in the Lamaist monasteries, for, as it has been explained, no worship is ever done in which the laity joins or even merely attends. And I'm going to pause here Well, that was really interesting. I hope you found it interesting too. And yes, if you did find it interesting, please like and subscribe. And till soon.